The night Astrid gave birth to her son, the northern lights danced across the sky in patterns the village elders had never witnessed before. Green and gold threads wove through the darkness, like Odin's ravens painting prophecies across the heavens. But it wasn't the celestial display that would mark this child's fate. It was what happened 3 winters later, when the flames refused to claim him. Young Hakon had always been different. While other children of the settlement scrambled after wooden toys and chased chickens through the muddy paths between longhouses, he sat motionless for hours, staring into the cooking fires with eyes that seemed far older than his small frame suggested. His mother, Astrid, would find him crouched beside the hearth at dawn, watching the embers pulse like heartbeats, whispering words in a language she didn't recognize. "The boy speaks to the flames," old Ingvar would mutter, making the sign against evil as he passed their dwelling. "Mark my words, nothing good comes from a child who finds comfort in fire's embrace." The settlement of Ravens Hollow sat nestled between towering pine forests and the churning waters of the great fjord. 53 souls called it home, each bound to the others by blood, oath, or necessity. They were farmers and fishermen, warriors and craftsmen, all united under the protection of Jarl Thormund, whose grandfather had carved their territory from the wilderness with axe and sword. It was a hard life, but an honest one, where the gods were close and winter tested the strength of every man, woman and child. Hakon's father, Ulf, had died during a raid across the western waters when the boy was barely old enough to walk. A Saxon spear had found its mark during a dawn assault on a coastal monastery, leaving Astrid to raise her son alone. She worked the loom and tended a small garden behind their modest dwelling, accepting charity from neighbors who pitied the young widow and her strange child. The boy's peculiarity first revealed itself during his second winter, when he began predicting the weather with uncanny accuracy. He would announce that snow would fall 3 days hence, or that the wind would shift to bring warming air from the south. At first, the villagers laughed at the child's pronouncements, but when his predictions proved true time and again, laughter turned to unease. "He has the sight," whispered Runa, the settlement's wise woman and keeper of old knowledge. "The gods have marked him, though for what purpose I cannot say." By his 3rd summer, Hakon's strange pronouncements had grown more specific and disturbing. He told the blacksmith Olaf that his forge fire would burn cold for 7 days, and indeed, no amount of bellows work could coax proper heat from the coals. He warned the fisherman Einar that the nets would come up empty if he sailed on the day of the new moon, and Einar, ignoring the child's words, returned with nothing but seaweed and curses. The villagers began to cross themselves when they saw the boy coming, and mothers pulled their children closer when he passed. They called him Flame-Touched and Odin's Cursed One, though never when Astrid could hear. She defended her son fiercely, insisting he was blessed, not cursed, but doubt gnawed at her heart like a hungry wolf. The morning that would change everything began like any other autumn day. The harvest had been gathered, and the settlement buzzed with preparations for the coming winter. Men repaired roofs and sealed gaps in walls, while women preserved fish and meat for the long, dark months ahead. Children played in the crisp morning air, their breath forming small clouds as they laughed and shouted. Hakon sat alone near the central fire pit, watching the flames dance and speaking his strange, soft words. The fire burned lower than usual that morning, and Thorbjorn, the settlement's firekeeper, had struggled to coax it to proper height. Several of the older boys had gathered around, led by Gunnar, the Jarl's youngest son, a boy of 9 winters known for his cruelty to those smaller than himself. "Look at the fire whisperer," Gunnar sneered, his breath visible in the cold air. "Maybe if he talks to it sweetly enough, it will dance for us like a trained bear." The other boys laughed, emboldened by their leader's mockery. They began throwing pebbles at Hakon, who didn't flinch or look away from the flames. His silence only frustrated them more. "I think the flames have stolen his tongue," called out Magnus, another of the Jarl's followers. "Perhaps we should help him find it." Before anyone could react, Gunnar grabbed Hakon by the shoulders and began dragging him toward the fire pit. The 3-year-old didn't struggle or cry out. He simply watched the approaching flames with the same calm expression he always wore. "Stop!" Astrid's voice cut across the settlement as she ran from her dwelling, her loom work forgotten. But she was too far away, and Gunnar's grip was strong. With a grunt of effort, the older boy shoved Hakon directly into the fire pit. The assembled children gasped and stepped back, expecting screams of agony and the sickening smell of burning flesh. Adults came running from all directions, drawn by the commotion and their own horrified cries. But Hakon did not scream. He sat in the center of the fire pit, completely engulfed in flames that rose around him like a golden cloak. His clothes should have been consumed instantly, his skin charred and blistered. Instead, he remained perfectly still, his small form visible through the dancing tongues of fire like a figure carved from flame itself. The fire seemed to embrace him, caressing rather than consuming, wrapping around his small body like a protective blanket. The settlement fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and Astrid's sharp intake of breath. Even the children stopped their sobbing and stared in wonder and terror at the impossible sight before them. Slowly, deliberately, Hakon stood and stepped out of the fire pit. Not a thread of his woolen tunic was singed. Not a hair on his head was touched. His skin was unmarked, not even flushed from the heat. He looked around at the circle of terrified faces with his strange, ancient eyes, and spoke in a voice that seemed to carry more weight than any 3-year-old should possess. "The fire knows me," he said simply, "and I know the fire." Jarl Thormund pushed through the crowd, his weathered face pale with shock. He was a man who had faced Saxon shields and Norse axes with equal courage, but the sight of this small child emerging unharmed from flames made his warrior's heart tremble. He knelt before Hakon, studying the boy's unmarked features with a mixture of awe and fear. "By Odin's ravens," the Jarl whispered, "the gods have marked you, child. But for what purpose?" Old Runa hobbled forward, her ancient bones creaking like ship timbers in a storm. She had served as the settlement's connection to the old ways for more than 60 winters, interpreting signs and omens, reading the runes carved in stone and bone. Her clouded eyes studied Hakon with intensity that made even the bravest warriors uncomfortable. "This is no mere blessing," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent settlement. "The fire did not burn him because he belongs to it. He is Odin's chosen, marked for prophecy and sight beyond the veil of this world." She reached into her pouch and withdrew a set of carved bone runes, each one inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the firelight. With practiced movements, she cast them onto the hard-packed earth at Hakon's feet and studied the pattern they formed. The runes told of a child born between worlds, gifted with sight that would pierce the mists of time, but cursed to bring sorrow to those who heard his words. They spoke of visions that would come true, but at a cost too terrible for mortals to bear. They warned of a gift that would grow stronger with each passing season until it consumed not just the boy, but all those around him. "He will be our greatest blessing and our deepest curse," Runa proclaimed, gathering the runes with trembling hands. "His words will carry the weight of fate itself, but those who hear them will wish they had been born deaf." Thormund stood slowly, his decision already made. As Jarl, it was his duty to protect the settlement from all threats, whether they came with sword and shield or in the form of a 3-year-old boy who could walk through fire unharmed. "The child will be fostered by the temple keepers at Thornwick," he declared. "They have the wisdom to guide such a gift and the strength to contain it if necessary." "No!" Astrid pushed through the crowd and swept Hakon into her arms. "He's my son. I won't let you take him away because you're afraid of what he might become." But even as she held him, Astrid could feel the otherness in her child's small form. He was warm, too warm, as if the fire still burned within him. His eyes held depths that no mortal child should possess, and when he looked at her, she felt as though he was seeing not just her present self, but all the versions of her that had been and might yet be. "Mother," Hakon said softly, his voice carrying a sadness that broke her heart. "The flames have shown me what comes next. You cannot change it, any more than you can change the path of the sun across the sky." Astrid's tears fell like autumn rain, each drop carrying the weight of a mother's love and a mother's fear. She knew, with the certainty that only comes from a parent's instinct, that this moment would be their last together as they had been. The fire had claimed her son in ways she couldn't understand, transforming him from her little boy into something far greater and more terrible than she could comprehend. The crowd began to disperse as the immediate shock wore off, but the fear remained. They had witnessed something beyond the natural order, something that challenged their understanding of the world and their place in it. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, and men touched the iron amulets at their throats for protection against forces they couldn't name. That night, as the settlement settled uneasily into sleep, Hakon sat beside the dying embers of the central fire. The flames spoke to him in voices only he could hear, showing him visions of what was to come. He saw his own future stretching out like a long, dark road, punctuated by moments of brilliant, terrible clarity. He saw the faces of those who would seek his counsel, and the sorrow that would follow in the wake of his words. Most clearly of all, he saw the price of his gift, that every truth he spoke would bring suffering to those who heard it, including those he loved most. The fire had chosen him not as a blessing to his people, but as a test, a reminder that knowledge of the future was a burden too heavy for mortal hearts to bear. As the embers died to ash and the northern lights painted their ancient patterns across the sky, Hakon whispered his first true prophecy into the darkness. It was a vision of fire and blood, of choices that would tear the settlement apart and reshape the destinies of all who called Raven's Hollow home. But there was no one awake to hear it, and perhaps that was a mercy. 7 winters had passed since the fire refused to claim young Hakon, and the boy had grown into something both more and less than human. Now 10 years of age, he possessed a lean frame that moved with uncanny grace, as if he walked between worlds with each step. His hair had darkened to the color of winter ash, and his eyes held depths that made grown warriors look away in discomfort. The settlement had learned to live with their chosen seer, but comfort remained as elusive as summer warmth in the depths of Fimbulwinter. Hakon no longer lived in his mother's dwelling. After the incident with the fire, Jarl Tormund had decreed that the boy needed guidance beyond what a grieving widow could provide. A small hut had been constructed at the edge of the settlement, close enough for protection, but far enough to contain whatever strangeness might emanate from the seer's presence. Old Runa had taken responsibility for his instruction, teaching him to read the ancient runes and understand the whispers of wind and flame. The arrangement served everyone's needs, though it satisfied no one's heart. Astrid could visit her son, but the awkward formality of their interactions pained them both. Hakon had grown distant, not through lack of love, but through the weight of visions that pressed upon his mind, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He spoke little, and when he did, his words carried implications that few wished to contemplate. The settlement had changed in those 7 years, shaped by Hakon's pronouncements like iron heated and hammered into new forms. When he warned that the eastern fishing grounds would be barren for 2 seasons, the men turned their nets toward deeper waters and brought home catches that fed the settlement through harsh winters. When he predicted that raiders would come from the south during the Feast of Freyr, Thormund had doubled the watch and prepared defenses that turned back attackers who might otherwise have claimed many lives. But with each accurate prophecy came a price that grew heavier with time. The fishermen, who heeded Hakon's warning about the eastern waters, developed a festering wound that never healed properly. The warriors, who prepared for the southern raiders, found themselves plagued by nightmares and strange ailments that no healer could cure. It was as if knowledge of the future extracted payment in suffering, collecting its due from those who dared to change fate's intended course. The morning that would test the limits of prophecy began with an unusual warmth for early spring. The snow had melted earlier than expected, and the fjord ran high with meltwater that reflected the pale sky like polished silver. Hakon sat outside his hut, studying patterns in the clouds that only he could interpret, when a commotion arose from the settlement's heart. A ship had appeared on the fjord, not one of their own vessels returning from trading ventures, but a sleek warship flying the banner of King Havath the Bloody, whose domain lay 3 days' sail to the north. The ship's arrival was unexpected, and its implications sent ripples of concern through the settlement, like stones thrown into still water. Thormund assembled his household guard and strode down to the shoreline to greet the unexpected visitors. The ship's captain was a grizzled warrior named Ulf Ironarm, whose reputation for both skill and cruelty had spread throughout the northern realms. He came ashore with 12 armed men, their mail shirts gleaming in the morning light and their hands resting casually on sword hilts. "Jarl Thormund!" Ulf called out as he approached, his voice carrying the authority of one who spoke for kings. "I bring greetings from King Havath, and a proposition that may interest a man of your wisdom." The formal courtesy did little to disguise the threat implied in Ironarm's presence. Kings did not send their most feared captains bearing friendly messages. They sent them to deliver ultimatums, dressed in diplomatic language. Thormund had ruled long enough to recognize the signs of approaching storm, even when it approached under banners of peace. "You honor us with your presence, Ulf Ironarm," Thormund replied, matching formality with formality, while his mind raced through possible responses to whatever demand would follow. "Your king's generosity in sending so distinguished a messenger speaks well of his regard for our humble settlement." Ironarm smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Indeed, the king has heard interesting tales of this place. Stories of a boy who walks through fire and speaks prophecies that come true. Such gifts are rare in these times, and King Havath believes they might serve a greater purpose than predicting fishing weather and warning of minor raids." The words hit Thormund like a physical blow. Somehow, word of Hakon's abilities had reached the king's court, carried by traveling merchants or wandering skald who valued a good story more than discretion. Once such knowledge spread beyond their borders, the settlement's peaceful isolation was doomed. Kings coveted power in all its forms, and a seer who spoke true prophecies represented power beyond the reach of sword or gold. "I fear you've been misinformed," Thormund said carefully, aware that his words would determine not just Hakon's fate, but the survival of everyone under his protection. "We have no such individual among us. Perhaps the stories grew in the telling, as stories often do." Ironarm's smile widened, revealing teeth filed to points in the manner of berserkers who sought to intimidate their enemies. "Come now, Jarl Thormund. Surely you don't take me for a fool. We have witnesses, traders who saw the boy emerge from flames unharmed, fishermen who profited from his warnings about barren waters. The king's interest is not based on idle gossip, but on verified reports from reliable sources." Before Thormund could respond, a new voice joined the conversation, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "There is no need for deception, Jarl. I am here." Hakon approached from the path leading to his dwelling, moving with that strange grace that always made observers feel slightly unsettled. He had grown tall for his 10 years, and the morning light seemed to gather around him like a visible manifestation of his otherworldly nature. Old Runa followed a few steps behind, her ancient face creased with worry and resignation. "Ah," Ironarm said, studying the approaching boy with the interest of a hunter evaluating promising prey. "So you are the famous Firewalker. You're younger than I expected, but power often comes in unexpected packages." Hakon stopped a few paces away from the armed warriors, seemingly unconcerned by their weapons or the threat they represented. His strange eyes fixed on Ironarm with an intensity that made the seasoned warrior shift uncomfortably despite himself. "You come seeking prophecy," Hakon said, his young voice carrying weight that made the words feel like pronouncements from the gods themselves. "But you do not understand the price of such knowledge, nor the burden it places on both speaker and listener." "The king's coin can bear any burden," Ironarm replied, though his usual confidence had diminished under the boy's unwavering gaze. "Name your price, and it shall be paid." Hakon tilted his head slightly, as if listening to voices only he could hear. The flames in the nearby torch brackets flickered despite the still air, and the temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Gold cannot pay for what you seek, nor can it protect you from what you will receive. The king sends you here because he fears his enemies and seeks knowledge of their plans. He believes prophecy will give him advantage in the battles to come. But some knowledge burns those who possess it, and some futures cannot be changed by mortal hands. Ironarm's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt, though he didn't draw the weapon. There was something in the boy's manner that suggested violence would be not just futile, but potentially catastrophic for all involved. "The king commands, boy. You will come willingly and serve the realm, or you will come in chains and serve it anyway. The choice is yours, but the outcome is not." For a long moment Hakon remained silent, his gaze shifting from Ironarm to the assembled warriors to the settlement beyond. Thormund could see the weight of decision settling on the boy's shoulders like a burial shroud. Whatever choice he made would ripple outward, affecting not just his own fate, but the destinies of everyone who had called him friend, family, or neighbor. "I will tell you one thing freely," Hakon said finally, his voice carrying across the water like the call of distant ravens. "In 3 days' time, at the moment when the sun reaches its highest point, your king will receive word that will change everything he believes about victory and defeat. That word will come from the east, carried by a rider whose horse is lame in the left foreleg. The message will be written on vellum, stained with blood that is not the messenger's own." Ironarm leaned forward despite himself, caught in the compelling certainty of the prophecy. What will the message say? Hakon's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a sadness so profound it seemed to encompass all the sorrow of the world. "That is knowledge you must earn through suffering, Captain. If you truly wish to know, take me to your king. But understand that the price of prophecy is always paid in full, and the payment is rarely what mortals expect." The captain's warriors shifted nervously, their hands tightening on their weapons as if steel could protect them from the implications of the boy's words. Even these hardened men, accustomed to violence and death, felt the chill touch of something beyond their understanding. "You speak in riddles, boy," Ironarm said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "The king has little patience for such games." "I speak truth," Hakon replied simply. "That you find it puzzling says more about your limitations than mine, but perhaps a demonstration will clarify matters." He turned toward the settlement, his gaze settling on Einar the fisherman, who stood among the gathered villagers with his wife and 3 young children. The man had been one of the first to benefit from Hakon's warnings, redirecting his nets to avoid barren waters and bringing home catches that sustained his family through difficult times. "Einar!" Hakon called out, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You have been kind to me, and your family has shown me nothing but courtesy. For this, I would spare you what comes next, but fate has already woven its pattern, and even I cannot unpick those threads." Einar paled, recognizing the weight of pronouncement in the boy's tone. His wife clutched their youngest child closer, as if maternal protection could shield them from whatever revelation was coming. "Your eldest son," Hakon continued, his words falling like stones into still water, "will not see his 14th winter. The fever that even now stirs in his blood will claim him before the harvest moon rises full. No healer's art can turn aside what has already been set in motion." The boy, Leif, barely 12 years old and the image of robust health, stepped forward with the fearlessness of youth. "I feel no sickness, Seer. Perhaps your sight has grown cloudy with too much staring into flames." Hakon's expression remained unchanged, but those who knew him well could see the pain that flickered behind his ancient eyes. "Touch your forehead, Leif Einarsson. Tell me what you feel." The boy raised his hand to his brow, and his confident expression crumbled as he felt the heat that had not been there moments before. His skin was flushed with the first signs of fever, and when he swallowed, his throat showed the telltale rawness that preceded the wasting sickness. Einar's wife began to weep, and the sound cut through the morning air like the keening of ravens over a battlefield. Other parents instinctively drew their children closer, as if proximity to tragedy might somehow be contagious. "You see," Haakon said to Iron Arm, though he continued to watch the family he had just condemned to grief, "this is the nature of prophecy. Truth that burns, knowledge that destroys, sight that brings only sorrow to those who possess it and those who hear it. Is this truly what your king desires?" Iron Arm stared at the scene before him, the dying boy, the grieving parents, the settlement recoiling in horror from their chosen seer. And for the first time in his career as the king's enforcer, he felt doubt gnawing at his certainty. "How do we know this is not some trick?" he asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "The boy may simply be ill from natural causes." Haakon finally turned his gaze back to the captain, and Iron Arm felt the full weight of that otherworldly stare. "Because, Ulf Ironarm, you know truth when you hear it, just as you know the taste of your own blood and the weight of your own sins. The fever I described is not natural. It is the price paid for the fish that fed Einar's family through the winter. Every prophecy demands payment, and that payment is always extracted from those who benefit from knowledge of the future." The captain's hand trembled slightly on his sword hilt as the implications struck him like physical blows. If the boy spoke truly, then every prophecy he delivered to the king would carry a curse. Every advantage gained through foreknowledge would cost something precious. Every victory achieved through prophetic guidance would be paid for in blood and sorrow. "The king must know of this," Iron Arm said finally, though he sounded less like a confident messenger and more like a man carrying word of his own execution. "Yes," Haakon agreed, stepping toward the waiting ship with the resigned dignity of one who had accepted an inevitable fate. "He must, and when he learns the true price of prophecy, he will understand why some gifts are more curse than blessing." As they prepared to depart, Astrid broke from the crowd and ran toward her son, her face streaked with tears that reflected both love and terror. She threw her arms around him, feeling again that unnatural warmth that seemed to emanate from his very bones. "My child," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "What have they done to you? What have the gods made you into?" Haakon returned her embrace with genuine affection, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "They have made me into a mirror, mother. I reflect truth so clearly that men cannot bear to look upon it for long, but perhaps that is what the world needs. Someone willing to show them the cost of their desires before it is too late to change course." He pulled back from her embrace and looked into her eyes one final time. "Do not grieve for me overmuch. The path I walk was chosen before I drew my first breath, and I would not change it even if the gods offered me that choice. Some burdens can only be carried by those strong enough to bear them without breaking." As the ship pulled away from shore, carrying Haakon toward an uncertain destiny at King Havath's court, the settlement of Raven's Hollow settled into an uneasy silence. The boy who had walked through fire was gone, but the echoes of his prophecies would linger like smoke from a dying flame, shaping the destinies of all who had known him. Behind them, young Leaf collapsed as the fever spiked, fulfilling the first of many prophecies that would prove the terrible truth of the seer's words, that knowledge of the future was indeed a gift, but one that no mortal heart could bear without breaking. Years would pass before the full weight of Haakon's prophecies became clear to those who had witnessed his departure from Raven's Hollow. King Havath did indeed receive word from the east on the appointed day, carried by a rider whose lame horse stumbled into the courtyard precisely as the sun reached its zenith. The message, written on blood-stained vellum, brought news of a massive rebellion that would ultimately cost the king both his crown and his life. But for every accurate prophecy Haakon delivered, the price grew heavier. Nobles who sought his counsel found their families plagued by mysterious ailments. Warriors who followed his strategic advice won their battles but lost their souls to an emptiness that no amount of gold or glory could fill. The king himself desperate for any advantage against his enemies, became increasingly dependent on the boy's visions, never understanding that each prophecy bound him more tightly to a fate he could not escape. In Raven's Hollow, the settlement learned to live with the memory of their chosen seer. Einar's son died as foretold, and the fishermen never again cast nets without remembering the cost of prophetic knowledge. The settlement prospered, guided by the warnings and wisdom Hakon had left behind, but prosperity came with the understanding that they had been both blessed and cursed by the presence of one touched by the gods. Astrid lived the rest of her days wondering whether her son had found peace in his service to powers beyond mortal comprehension, or whether the weight of prophecy had finally consumed the gentle child she remembered. She never learned that Hakon had become something both more and less than human, a conduit for divine will who had surrendered his mortal happiness so that others might glimpse the truth hidden behind the veil of time. The fire that had refused to burn him as a child continued to burn within him, consuming not his flesh but his connection to the simple joys that make mortal life bearable. He had become what the gods needed him to be, but in doing so, he had paid the ultimate price, not his life, but his humanity itself. And in the halls of kings and the huts of farmers, people still whispered of the child who walked through fire and emerged unchanged, never understanding that the flames had indeed transformed him, burning away everything that made him merely human, and leaving behind something far more terrible and precious, a voice that spoke truth in a world built on comfortable lies. The gods, it seemed, demanded nothing less than everything, and those they chose as their instruments learned too late that some gifts were indistinguishable from the cruelest of curses. Thank you for watching this tale from the frozen north. If you enjoyed this journey into Norse mythology, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more legendary stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with mythology enthusiasts from around the world. What other tales from the Norse sagas would you like to see brought to life? Your suggestions help shape our content, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts below.